Hi everyone, it's TJ with Aviation. In the following brief video, we're going to be discussing some different tips and tricks for troubleshooting an IFD that is interfaced to a fuel flow system where something's maybe not working correctly. As always, everything in the following video is for reference use only. For FAA approved data, please see the IFD installation manual. Make sure you're looking at the latest revision. Alright, so to start off with, when the IFD is interfaced to a functioning fuel flow system, we should get fuel range rings on the map in flight. Those range rings are going to depict the range of the aircraft given the current fuel quantity remaining while going by the current total fuel flow. Now, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see these on the ground necessarily, because it does take aircraft airspeed and GPS ground speed and all of that stuff into account while it's doing the calculation. So I wouldn't necessarily look for this to be a valuable troubleshooting piece while you're trying to troubleshoot an aircraft sitting in the hangar or maybe even on the ground doing engine runs. However, getting this information fed back from a pilot that's taking it on a test flight might be useful for troubleshooting, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this particular piece if you're just troubleshooting a system on the ground. Okay. One thing that we should see when we start the IFD up in normal flight mode, once we go through the normal startup sequence, press enter, allow, ignore for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth options, it should take us to our fuel management page. If it senses that there is a fuel management system connected and communicating, it defaults to taking you to this page after you go through that startup sequence. Now, if your fuel flow system provides fuel totalizer information, you might not need to do anything on this page at all. But if you've got a fuel system that does not provide fuel totalizer, if it's fuel flow only, you will need to enter beginning fuel data on this page. The IFD doesn't know how much fuel you're starting out with if you don't have fuel totalizer data coming across. But this can be a handy little page to kind of see what data you have and what data you don't. That fuel management page, if it does not come up after the startup sequence and the allow ignore option for your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, that may or may not be an indication of a problem. Okay, if there's no fuel flow system communicating with the IFD, it's not going to take you to that page. But there are also instances where when we boot an IFD up into normal flight mode, where it may think that it's in the air, specifically if it was previously shut down without being locked on to a solid GPS, it might reboot and think it's flying until it locks onto GPS and realizes it's on the ground. And when you reboot an IFD in flight, it's going to skip a lot of that normal startup sequence as well as this fuel management page. So don't take that as a hard and fast rule. Just not seeing the fuel management page come up, it may be because you're sitting in the hangar and you're not locked onto GPS and the IFD doesn't know for sure that it's on the ground. Okay. Another great method you can use for troubleshooting fuel flow interface. All of these fuel flow interfaces that we call out in the installation manual are fed in via RS-232. So what you can do is you can go in maintenance mode and go to your aux page group, the status tab, and you're going to cycle this info button down here in the lower left until it says info RS-232. And what that's going to bring you to is our RS-232 port monitor. So what this page should be showing us is data flow coming in. It's not going to necessarily tell us what's on those data lines or anything else, but we should see in this bytes column right here, we should see data coming in. That column should have a number in there that represents the number of bytes coming across that data port, and that number should continually climb if we've got good data coming in. Okay. If that reads as 0, that means the IFD is not seeing any data on that port. Now, something to keep in mind is if you've just configured the port in maintenance mode on the config tab, going over here to the status page may not necessarily come to life immediately. Usually whenever we've made a configuration change in maintenance mode on the config page, we always recommend doing a hard power cycle on the IFD for that config change to take. So once you've gone in and configured your fuel flow device on the config pages, do a hard power cycle. I normally recommend just cycle Avionics Master off and on, and once it boots back up, go back into maintenance mode, and you should be able to go to this page and see some data flow coming in on whichever port it is you have wired and configured for that fuel flow device. And this other column over here, this errors column, sometimes this can point us in a direction when it comes to troubleshooting these things. So what that errors column represents is the number of errors being reported through the data input. So if we are showing data coming in, our bytes column is climbing, but our errors column is climbing as well, it's a pretty good indication that either something's configured incorrectly, maybe we've got a baud rate mismatch, or some configuration piece is not correct. We'll also see a lot of errors on that port if maybe we've got our RS-232s confused. For instance, if I had a shade and fuel flow device connected to RS-232 port 4, but I had RS-232 port 2 configured for that shading, and 4 is configured for something else. If I got my configuration settings messed up as far as what port is what, that's usually what you'll see here. Is you'll see information's coming in, but you're going to get a lot of errors associated with it. Something else we found that can create some errors on this page is if you have some EMI happening. So maybe you got a bad shield on your RS-232 pair or something like that, where it's allowing electromagnetic interference to come in and interfere with the data on that data stream. Sometimes that can show up here as errors as well. And then the other end of it, for all of our fuel flow interfaces, the IFD is providing aviation data out to the fuel flow device. The easiest way to check that out is to boot the IFD in a normal flight mode, wait for the IFD to lock on a GPS, and then program a direct to into the IFD. Just pick a waypoint, doesn't matter. What you should be able to do is on your fuel flow device is go verify that that fuel management system is receiving waypoint flight plan type information. If it's not, there's a good chance something's not configured correctly, or double check your wiring, that kind of thing. Make sure that we don't have our transmits and receives mixed up, what have you. That usually solves the issue right there. But you do need to be locked on a GPS for that to work correctly. So keep that in mind. Just a reminder that your aviation data output from the IFD, it can be paralleled if you have other stuff in the aircraft that needs that aviation data, but it doesn't have to be. It's a cool feature with the IFDs. You can set multiple aviation outputs, assuming you have enough RS-232s available to do so, and that aviation output will work fine on all of the ports it's configured on. So you can actually have independent aviation data going out to, say an ELT or something, as well as a fuel flow device out on 2 separate ports, and that should work just fine. Okay? Alright, that pretty much does it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll see you in the next one.